Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for this ChangeNerd episode. Today we are speaking with Bill Kirst. He is a OCM leader at West Monroe Partners. He's also a fellow podcaster. He leads the podcast Coffee and Change with Bill Kirst. So Bill, thank you so much for carving out time to have this conversation.
You bet, Brian. It's an honor to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bill, some people in the ChangeNerd community know of you already, but for those who don't, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. For those I haven't had a chance to interact with on the community, as Brian mentioned, I'm a change management leader within my firm, West Monroe Partners. We're based in Chicago, so a lot of you in the Chicago area probably know of us. I currently live in Seattle, and in this role, I oversee our change management practice for the West Coast region. So I oversee Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And these days I'm spending a lot of time, I'm a senior principal, which means I'm kind of a deep expert in change management, specifically around digital change and helping clients manage that journey and that evolution to digital transformation.
Yeah.
And spending a lot of days on the road with clients, helping them kind of work through the change curve, if you will. So it's a little bit about me.
Absolutely. So Bill, just to start the conversation off, we're talking about mindfulness in the workplace. When I reached out to you and said, "Hey, Bill, would you do another webcast?" You know, of course, you're a great supporter, and I really appreciate that. And of all the topics, I think we agreed upon mindfulness. You know, what motivated you to want to talk more about this particular topic?
Yeah, it's a great question, and as I was kind of prepping for today's discussion, I thought a lot about how I keep hearing this word, mindfulness, sometimes meditation, sometimes well-being, mental health. All these words are being are increasingly kind of creeping up into our workplace, and I think it's a good thing because it's a conversation that needs to happen. And to give you an idea, just before we got online here, I went on and did a little bit of research, just in terms of Google News and seeing like what's popping up in news. And just in the past hour, so just in the past 60 minutes, 7 articles have been published on mental health in the workplace. 4 articles have been published on anxiety in the workplace. 16 articles have been published on well-being in the workplace. And 1 article has been published on mindfulness in the workplace. So the reason I share these stats with you is I think that's an indicator of kind of where we're at in sort of the evolution of this discussion. You can see there's a lot more discussion and news generated around mental health, anxiety, well-being, but there's less, I think, around mindfulness in the workplace. And so it's not atypical, right? Tough news or negative news attracts. So we see a lot of articles around people struggling, trying to make sense of how to achieve the balance.
Yeah.
People struggling with things like imposter syndrome. How do I keep up with the cycle? How do I stay fresh and relevant? And all of those things, I think, are sometimes anxiety-inducing experiences. And so I think the reason I wanted to talk about this and the reason I stay close to it is I want to shift the discussion a little bit away from the detriment stuff, away from the does it have to be anxiety and does it have to be a negative perspective on mental health, and more into the, hey, there are things that people can do to sort of take back their power and their freedom and their and their peace of mind. So that's essentially why I wanted to talk about it and why I'm excited to talk about it with you and your listeners and your community today.
Absolutely. So just to level set, how would you describe mindfulness? If you had to do it in 1 or 2 sentences, how would you?
Sure. It's a tough one, but I will boil it down to this. For me, mindfulness is paying attention to what's happening in the present moment without judgment. And the key for me is the without judgment part. I think where high performers or people in high demanding occupations or under a lot of stress, the part that's hard to do is the self-judgment, right? We perform and we pay attention to what's happening around us, but then we, as I talked about before, we have an imposter syndrome, or we say I could have done that better, or we start thinking about the past and the future, and that overtakes our body, and by result, it overtakes our brain. And so for me, mindfulness is paying attention to what's happening in the present moment without judgment.
Yeah, yeah. And then, so what would be the purpose and benefit of investing time in learning more about mindfulness? Like, what would be the overall benefit? It seems kind of clear, but from your perspective, what would be the one or two benefits?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's a couple immediate benefits that I've experienced over the course of sort of a multi-year journey. And I think when I occupy the space of kind of the present, it gives me more freedom. I feel more I feel more still in kind of in my experience. And what it reduces is the tendency for emotions or thoughts to take over.
Exactly.
um, and one of the things I realize is, and I often say this to myself, remember, you are not your thoughts. They are your thoughts, but those thoughts themselves do not make up your entire being, do not make up all of who you are. And I think that's what we struggle with a lot is, our thoughts get going, and those thoughts lead to emotions, and emotions present themselves in your body. I mean, that's 90% of the word emotion is motion. It literally is something has to move through your body in order for you to kind of be at peace. And so for me, it was about making a choice on how I want to experience things and how I want to show up. The ability to pause for what I want to say and for what I want to do. It just gave me so many more options and freedom and flexibility. And I think the other piece that's probably most noticeable, Brian,
Yeah.
is the amount of creativity that came up for me.
Yeah.
Just by exploring this, it gave me the opportunity to not react as much, but instead start responding. And by moving from reacting to responding, there was a lot more room on the table for conversations of curiosity that led to creativity, that have led to innovation, and frankly, have led to deepening conversations with both clients, peers, family members, etc.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. Oftentimes when me and Stephanie are talking to each other, and then when we speak with groups, we're oftentimes, especially with it being in 2020, we're
Hmm.
here now, right? So, we're always asking each other, but then, kind of asking this question towards groups: where do you see yourself in 2030?
Right,
you know
right.
and then, we're talking about mindfulness. I think mindfulness is one of the areas that we as individuals have to pay like really close attention to if we
Hmm.
want to get serious and start achieving short-term and long-term goals. I love it. And I remember, I think it was an email you sent me about you being a multi-year journey. It is a
Hmm.
multi-year journey. It's not
Right.
something that you can fix in like a day or a month. It's kind of continual focus. What are some of the tools that you use to help you? And I have two questions, Bill. What are some
Sure.
of the tools that you use to kind of better yourself on a daily or even weekly basis? And then how would you take this concept of mindfulness and put it in a team
Hmm.
perspective? How, if for someone who's on a project team, how can we take some of these principles of mindfulness and lay it over and benefit a team?
Yeah, two great questions. I'll start with kind of the first one in terms of tools. I think, as most folks probably know, this is, I think, it's a positive change. This is becoming a busy space, and what I mean by that, there's plenty of people out there, coaches, app designers, developers, that are starting to talk about, hey, what's the next app or the next biohack I can do to sort of get to this place of mental awareness and stillness and peace. So it can be a little bit overwhelming initially when you jump in. You're like, okay, should I download this tool? Should I? My best advice to people is there's no right way. There's only your way. This is something I've learned over the course of multiple years, that everybody's going to have a slightly different variation of what works for them because we're all a little bit different. That said, I can say that the tools that I have used in kind of my journey is a little bit blend of finding people who are uh, known in this space, plus a little bit of the digital side. So, for example, I follow people like Tara Brach, who's pretty well known as a psychologist and a mindfulness teacher, or Andy Petticombe, who created the app Headspace, which is one of the tools that I use. Or I follow a podcast by Michael Gervais, who is a sports psychologist for the Seattle Seahawks. So what I end up doing is I blend a little bit of, yes, I use Headspace. I try to use Headspace as an app daily, and I try and do meditation twice a day, 20 minutes at a time. That's a big investment. Understand, for people listening, that's not the expectation. This has taken me about 5 years to get to.
Wow.
To a place where you can do 20 minutes at a time, twice a day. But I was able to, listen to people, study what they do, find the tools that work for me. There are other tools like Calm is an app that you can listen to. There's an app called Insight Timer, which has a plethora of stuff that you can research as well.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really about making your own toolkit. There is no right way. There is the one experience. But I encourage people with curiosity to go explore and figure out what works well for you. And the second part, of your question, in terms of how do we bring this to teams, for me, I can only share my journey and my story. And what I've done in a workplace is I slowly and in small steps just open up my journey to people. So when people say, hey, I noticed on your calendar that you have a mindfulness minutes section Wednesday at noon. Can I ask you about that? Sure, absolutely. I intentionally put that on my calendar in a very visible way so that people could ask questions. Or I might bring in a book, around mindfulness, and actually have it on my desk. And people walk by and they say, oh, what's this? And I say, oh, it's a book I'm reading. And, I can tell them a little bit more about it. So for me, the best way to bring teams along or introduce teams to is just have them approach it from a place of curiosity. If you were to sit down with people and say, hey, would you like to sleep better? Would you like less anxiety? Would you like more creativity? Would you like more stillness in your mind? I think every single human being would say, yes, I want to know more. The hard part can sometimes be the on-ramp to that seems intimidating. It doesn't have to be, but that's why I encourage people to sort of take small steps, come at it from curiosity, do some research, figure out what works for you, and then share with others. And understand that it's not a huge lift. You don't have to restructure how your teams work. Maybe just have a conversation with them. There's a lot of work that folks like Brene Brown have done in terms of, team dynamics. And I still think there's a stigma and there's a shame, spiral around mental health. And I think it's hard to take that on. That's a tidal wave, right? It's hard to take that tidal wave, but there are ways that you can come at it from the side and say, is there an opening for me to have a conversation with someone?
Bill, what I observed, particularly in the change management space, as I attend ACMP conferences and other conferences, is that you have speakers come in and talk about the importance of neuroscience.
Yes. Yeah.
And then now we have more content around, mindfulness. Mm-hmm. As someone like yourself who works in professional services, over the next, 3 years or so, could you see a mindfulness offering, being presented to your clients as a way of, enhancing leadership development or employee engagement within organizations? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you bring up an important word in there is neuroscience. So there are some organizations like the Neuro Leadership Institute, which has done some great work, which even if I think about my own journey, sort of the seeds may have been planted years ago at an ACMP conference where the keynote speaker was head of the Neuro Leadership Institute. And he talked about some of this stuff from a strictly brain science standpoint, which is irrefutable. And I thought how powerful this moment was, that I'm sitting in this room with this keynote speaker. He's talking about some stuff, and I feel like he is glancing directly into my brain and into my soul. And I'm thinking, how could this guy possibly know this? He's never met me. And I looked around the room, and everybody else had that same sort of glow about them, like, wow, he's seeing into my head. And that's the beauty of this, right? When you get down to the way the brain works and why and under what conditions certain neurochemicals fire, it makes it not personal. Like there's an opportunity for me to say, this isn't just me. This is actually something that happens in the human body. So it was from there that I started learning more and incorporating this into my work. So to your question around change management and doing the work we do, absolutely. When I lead people through visioning sessions or understanding what their values are, hey, how do we navigate this change and these impacts? One of the things I try and do is share with them at a very high level, because I'm not a neuroscientist at all by trade, but to help them understand what's happening in their body when they're introduced to change. We've talked about this a little bit before, I think, in conversations, but the fight or flight that happens, we can't underestimate that with our clients and our peers.
Yeah.
Once your mind goes into that fight or flight state, it actually shuts down the ability for the neofrontal cortex to do decision making. And so we find ourselves in these places where we want to make a decision, but sometimes we're frozen and we don't know how to get out of it. And so for me, why mindfulness could easily be brought into the work that you do, that I do, that our peers do, is it gives people a third way. It doesn't have to be fight or flight or completely analytical. I can take pause. I can sort of be in the present and understand, hey, what's happening right now? Let me look around my environment. Let me see what triggers are happening. Let me take a breath. Let me understand. And in some ways, you can get up to some pretty interesting stuff. Several years in, I've learned the capability of watching myself. So it sounds a little crazy, but you can actually get it so that if you were to imagine yourself watching yourself go through something, what's really interesting is by nature of that, you actually have more empathy for what you're going through. Because if I were watching you go through something painful, Brian, my empathy would be dialed up, and I'd be like, man, I wish I could help him. Let me find a way to help him. Rarely, if ever, do we apply that empathy lens to ourselves, right? That's where the negative self-talk comes in, and the tape that runs in our head comes in. And so just getting to a point in my journey of mindfulness where I can sometimes literally step out and watch myself in this journey, I've already given myself a dose of empathy. And with that empathy, it allows more room for connection and connectivity with people.
Yeah, yeah. Bill, I know I'm recording this, but I'm blown away too. I'm like, man, so much insight, so much insight. Your community, your network, are there people that you connect with, like personally that help you get better at mindfulness? Me and Stephanie, we're big advocates, obviously, of community,
Sure.
like-minded people. Are you at a place where you connect with other people who are practicing the same kind of progression that you are?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the fascinating parts about doing this work is, as I mentioned, everybody's path is unique, and that's the beautiful part of it. And I think there's a level of accountability that, frankly, I wanted to add into my life for this, because it's great that I have the app that I can, check in each day, and it tells me, that I've done over 200 something hours and had all these
Yeah,
sessions or whatever. Those are KPIs, those are benchmarks, right? And sometimes it's nice to look at that. But to your point around community, I personally believe that there's an accountability within community that actually helps me get stronger in this space. And so, yes, so I have engaged in community. Obviously, here in Seattle, we have quite a thriving community of people when they're thinking about mental well-being or integrating, mind and body, and how do you achieve that balance. I think you and I, both having a military background, places like Washington, D.C., where I used to live before, I think they're maybe in a different place, or, Chicago or New York. But the good news is I think it's not hard to, do a little outreach and find where those communities are. So here in Seattle, I was able to plug into sort of a small mindfulness and meditation group. It's a group of about 5 people. And what's beautiful about it, we actually do a blend of in-person and technology. So just like we're connecting here on Zoom,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
every 2 weeks on a weekday night, I connect on a Zoom, with 4 other people. And what's really great is we hold space for each other, and we do some meditation, and we have discussion and around mindfulness exercises and how people are doing. And there's not only an accountability there, but there's also, as you talked about, the support.
Yeah.
So I don't feel alone in it. I can ask questions in it. And I think it's those 4 other human beings on the planet that have kind of been through this um, commitment with me that have been really helpful. That that you know that gathering is a year long journey.
Yeah.
Um, and in March, we'll be coming up on the end of it. And so it's really interesting. You have these beautiful beginnings and these beautiful endings about the work that we're talking about. But certainly, I could not have done this alone. I think there's a lot of work that I had to work through alone to get to a place of understanding why my brain works the way it does.
Yeah.
But then also to share that with people just reinforces what we said before around I realize, hey, I'm not alone in this. And when you know you're not alone, you know the change isn't so hard. You can approach it, you can do it, you can take the first step because you've got support, you've got a champion.
Exactly. Exactly. No, Bill, thank you for that. We're about to move to closing this out.
Sure.
Any last words? Any last remarks? What would you what would be the one thing that you would recommend to someone who wants to, just apply more mindfulness, not even learn, but more so apply it in their life? What would be the one tip that you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be the struggle, but I would say I recently have listened to there's a podcast that kind of came across my radar called A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment. And it sounds pretty intense, but the reason I share that is because, you know, I can be a very heady person, a very academic person. And I think at times, even in this journey, there's healthy doses of skepticism, right? In our world and in our life and in our work. And you need that. You need that to stay safe
Yeah.
and be true to who you are. I would encourage people maybe to go listen to a podcast like that, because that um, podcast host does a really good job of kind of breaking stuff down, but not in a way that you feel pressured to try anything. It's sort of an exploration of what might work for people. It's relatively new. It's only a couple episodes in, and I listened to it recently and thought, you know what, something like this would have been so helpful to me 4 years ago when I jumped into the deep end. So just having the ability to do some research and and then curate your own questions is my advice to people. And then the second thing I would say is reach out. Consider me an extension of this network. If people have questions, happy to answer them or direct them to things. But know this: you cannot be wrong in this. There's no right way. So the challenge we run into is we want to get it right. I want to be the best at it, right? That's the Army officer.
Right. Right.
And I resist that. And with that resistance comes a whole exploration of possibilities. So I would say, be kind to yourself if you're exploring this journey, and use the network to help you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Bill, I know you're a very busy person. Thank you for
Yeah.
carving time to have this conversation, and thank you for all your support with the ChangeNerd community. I can't say it enough. Really appreciate you and your contributions. For those of you who are on the line, thank you for carving out time to be a part of this. And this concludes the webcast.